Hi, my name is Mike Sigman, and this videotape is about whole body movement using internal strength. The material on this tape is a continuation of the material that we used on the first video, which was how to do internal strength. The material that was on that first tape is a necessity for you to understand and use the material that is on this tape. So the suggestion is, of course, that you take a look at that first tape and understand, at least academically, that material before you approach this material. This particular tape is about how to use internal strength in the whole movement, whole body movement that you do in, say, normal practice exercises or in a lot of the internal martial arts like Tai Chi, Xing Yi, Aikido, Bagua, Yi Chuan. And so we'll be covering that in a reasonably logical format. Before we do that, though, I'd like to take a few minutes and just take a quick look at the most common postural mistakes that I run into, even from somebody who thinks they understand the material. So for the moment, if I could borrow my good friend, Mark Reeder. All right. So if Mark is in a posture like this, this is a good way for us to look at it. If I were evaluating somebody, some of the things that I would tend to notice right away would be whether Mark is relaxed and allowing the ground path to come through, so that the moment I touch him, I should be able to feel immediately the sole of his foot. So if he's not relaxed, his body stops that flow of the ground path coming through. So when I do this, I would, and if I were correcting a posture of somebody, I would suggest, first of all, the first thing and the most common error is that people's backs are too tense. So I would ask that they relax the back by relaxing the knee of the supporting leg, and then just relax the lower back, and you'll see the pelvis turn a little bit automatically when that happens. Secondly, a lot of people tend to approach this as an idea of where there's a platform of the body and then there's an arm or an appendage coming out from it. And really what we're looking at is an idea where there's a structure and it's supporting a force going in this direction into his body and into the back. So when I take Mark's arm like this, he actually allows the pressure from his left leg, his back leg, to meet the pressure of my incoming force. Okay? You have to constantly be evaluating this, this sort of like, am I using shoulder? Is my back tight? If he's turning, thanks, Mark. If he's turning, then the body should be making the arm turn. Okay, so the arm is moving across because you can see me driving it across this way. Whereas the most common mistake is that you see people get into a very solid position and then they move the arm. Okay, so this is an extremely common error that you see quite commonly. And also when you see somebody push or hit something, many times instead of treating the ground path as a whole from the hands down, if it's a complete hole, we'll compress along it and then expand along it. But you'll see many people compress and then shift into arms and shoulders and then come back out. So I'm always looking to see if someone uses the whole ground or whether they have simply resorted back to shoulder and arm, which is the way we commonly move. The way to keep your mind fixed is if somebody touches me or feels me, would they feel the relaxed ground path going to the sole of my foot at all times during my motions? If that is kept intact and you're worried about somebody testing you all the way through, then you'll probably begin to succeed pretty well with utilizing a ground path. So just worry about whatever you touch or whoever is touching you, are they feeling a very relaxed ground path? If you keep your mind on that, you can't help but be successful. In considering how internal strength in the body are used, we have to look at two major factors. The first one, and the most important one really, is how to manipulate the ground path vectors and the gravity in the four directions: the up, away from the body, down, and toward the body. So this can be done in a number of ways, but we would like to mesh it in with another factor, and that is how the body moves naturally. The body moving naturally is what we'll take a look at in the next few sections, but in this case, I want to be sure that everyone remembers the one focus, and that's always if you were stopped in any particular motion and somebody tested you and checked, would the ground path be very complete, solid, and would you be very relaxed? All right, so in terms of looking at how the body works, we'll look at the body like this. The body closes downward using gravity. When it closes, the knees come in, the elbows come in, the back bows over, and we've sunk down. As we sink down, the musculature along the torso of the body and so forth contracts slightly, obeying the pull of the gravity on the lower torso. Okay? And then the other half of that is the ground path is used to stretch upward and outward. Okay, in this case, as you talk about opening like this, the elbows rotate out, the knees in a way sort of push out and up, the back bow unbends, and we come into this position. So we can say there are two extreme positions. One is closed, in which the elbows and knees are in, the back is bowed, and then we're going to open, in which the joints open upward and outward, and the elbows come out, the knees come out from the position they were in, and we're relaxed and letting gravity support the body straight through to the feet. Okay? So we could say this winding is something to look at. And to take a look at the winding, we could consider that the body is in two halves. For instance, from my left leg up through my left arm, we could almost consider as being one tube. And from my right leg up through my right arm, we could say is another tube. So these tend to work in tandem like this. They turn inward and they turn outward. They turn inward and they turn outward. They turn inward as you bow and contract and close the body. They turn outward as you unbow, unbend, and move upward. Okay? So there's closing looks sort of like this, and opening looks sort of like this. So I could say that this is basically duplicating those tubes. I close like this, and I open like this. I can say that any particular motion, for instance, on one side is one tube. For instance, if I'm going to do a motion like this, you can look at it and imagine the tube that I just used winding and twisting in as it bows close. Then as I begin to push from this right leg, the tube on this side will unwind and go the other way. So as I come in and downward, the elbow comes in, the knee comes in, and the body twists in one direction. Then as I push up, the leg and the arm begin to twist in the other way. So this is the way the body moves naturally. All right, so let's move on and begin to take a look at the whole body scenario with various motions and techniques as we go further along. The winding and the unwinding of the body is one way to do things. We could do pretty much a lot of the things by strictly linearly closing and opening, as opposed to winding close and unwinding. Some styles actually forego the worries and necessities of winding and go straight to a linear control of the ground path and gravity. And this is fine. The ground path works either way. The winding tends to add a little bit of complexity, but overall it also adds some strength and body conditioning that are quite useful over a long period of time. Even though you're doing these windings and unwindings or whatever you're doing as we do further exercises, let me stress one more time that you should stay relaxed. If you don't stay relaxed, you don't allow the body to reset itself, to repattern, to recoordinate so that larger and different muscle groups come into play to absorb loads. If you tend to be tense in the shoulders or the back, then those tensions prohibit or hinder the retraining of the body. So it's very critical, and I say this a lot to everybody, that you just stay very relaxed, try to let the ground path do the work. Don't try to add to it or do any sort of work that will be strong enough or heavy enough to stress your body back into its normal tense modes. We're going to take a look at the universal exercise. And by universal exercise, I mean this. The universal exercise looks like this. The movements in this exercise go from closed to open to closed. Because of that configuration, it can be said that almost any motion in the internal arts is some variation of the universal exercise. In other words, for instance, in Tai Chi, every movement in Tai Chi, the Tai Chi form, application, whatever, can be said to be derived directly from this motion. That sounds a little extreme perhaps, but as we go along, you'll probably be able to see this pretty easily. All right, so again, as I said in the last section, there's a down and there's an up. If we look at the down involves, again, gravity pulling down. The muscles of the torso tend to begin to work together, particularly in this area, to pull down toward the perineum. The muscles in the back pull down into this area and along the sacroiliac, the sacrum, so forth. So when we go down, we're winding, we're contracting. The connection of the body, in other words, the connection where if somebody were pulling me here, they would actually feel like I was pulling them with my belt. The connection is in place. Gravity is pulling everything down. We're exhaling as we go down. The exhale itself involves a lot of the muscles in the thorax, and they're adding to the contraction. Our back is bowing, or you could say that the back is closing. It's acting like a hinge. It's beginning to close over. And as we do this, of course, we could take a look at our belly, and we could say that it is rotating down. Okay, so the belly rotates down. If we go and we begin to look at the other direction, of course, we could say that because the legs are straightening, the pelvic cage is beginning to tilt, the belly begins to go up as the back unbows. So the direction that the belly or the middle turns will be something we'll look at. All right, so the down portion we've looked at. The up portion involves the body propagating the solidity of the ground. So we want to be sure that the ground path is here at the tips of the fingers, and we're lifting something with the ground path. As we go up, the body begins to unwind. The elbows come out, and we ultimately wind in this position. The critical point I want to look at for a moment is the back. As I'm starting down and my back is sort of bent, as I begin to push upward, my legs push into the back, so the back begins to bow and spread, and that helps lift and raise outward the rest of the motion, the arms going up and out. So when I go down, the legs bend, the knees come in, elbows come in, the back is bowed. But when I start up, I push into the back, and that causes the expansion and raise of much of the rest. Okay, so, and as we come up, we inhale, and that inhale helps expand a lot of the motion. Okay, so now let's take a look at it all together. We push from the ground, we push into the back, but that's the body acting, and what we want to pay attention to is that the ground path is here. So we've got, again, those two factors that are coming into play. One is the way the body moves, and the other is where is the ground path. So in this case, we're pushing from the ground up, and our ground path goes up. It goes out away from the body. Now we use our weight coming down, and then as we sink a little bit further, the body begins to pull inward toward itself. So our hands begin to come in. So those four directions of up, out, down, toward the body still come into play, these four directions. So we wind in. Somebody feeling our hands would feel we are trying to put the ground right on top of the fingers. We wind outward while we inhale. We now allow gravity to be acting against anything that would slow our hands down. We come down. As we come down, the knees come in, the elbows come in, we wind inward. Okay? So I'm winding one way, now I'm winding the other way. Wind, inhale. Wind the other way, exhale. The back should bow. Okay, so the back is bowed, it now unbows. Come down, it bows. Raise up, it unbows. I come down, the belly tends to turn downward. I go back up, the belly tends to rotate vertically upward. I'm doing this exaggeratedly, which is probably the way most people should learn it. As you get better, the same windings, bowings, and everything are going on, but it becomes a smaller movement, so it looks like inhale, exhale. I'm aware of the legs supporting most of the load, and now pushing into the back. If you use too much motion for too long of a period of time, you probably train bad patterns into the body. Because you want to do this correctly in terms of the way the body winds and unwinds, opens and closes. You want to mainly be concerned with where the forces are, the up, out away from the body, down, in toward the body. And if you waste energy in too large a motion, then that's all you're doing. You're wasting energy. So concentrate on letting the body move correctly. Let that begin to get smaller and smaller. The main thing is to stay very relaxed and manipulate mainly those four directions of power. All right, let me do this the other way also. I can reverse this direction. Now remember the first one, in the first one as we go up and I push into the back, you can see the back expand as it comes up. So we could say that the power of the body went up along the back. If I reverse this direction and I go up the outside and down the middle, okay, up the outside, down the middle. As I go up the outside, notice my chest begins to protrude somewhat. So now the pushing path goes up the chest instead of up the back. Notice that the legs are involved in this. Many people make a mistake by trying to stand in place and not use the legs and let the torso articulate somewhat, but they don't use the legs. The legs are involved in this. Okay, so if you wanted just one single exercise to do to practice many things, this universal exercise in either of these two formats, but mainly in this one where you come up the middle and down the outside, that's one I'd recommend as probably being the most beneficial for the time and effort involved. All right, so now let's move along and go into uses of various things that all involve essentially the universal exercise in the way that they move. Before we go on too much more with the movement, let me interject a few comments about breathing. And before I say something about the breathing, let me put in the standard disclaimer sort of thing that breathing can complicate your exercise in ways that none of us can foretell, so always check with your physician before you get involved with any training regimen, not just some of these that may potentially affect your health one way or another, hopefully not adversely. In breathing, there are essentially two ways of breathing, what they call natural breathing. And natural breathing involves involves your letting the lower, the belly and the abdomen expand somewhat when you breathe. So when you breathe, the reason you breathe is that the diaphragm came down, that created a vacuum, and that pulls air into your lungs. So when you breathe, any breath, I don't care, natural, reverse, or whatever, it is affected by the diaphragm pulling downward. So when the diaphragm pulls down, it moves the organs in the visceral cavity, and so your belly protrudes somewhat, and the abdomen a little bit too. And this is natural breathing. Also, there's some tendency for the ribs to expand. That's why they're made mobile. So when you breathe naturally, the ribs expand a little bit. And so if you're lifting something, let's say in our universal exercise, then as we lift and we're breathing inward, the expansion of the ribs and the back along near the trapezius and so forth actually assist and augment your opening and expanding power. And of course, when you exhale, like this, because the diaphragm comes back up into place, air goes out of the lungs, there's less pressure on the abdominal cavity, so it tends to come back in to some degree. All right, that's natural breathing, and this is normally when you are practicing this form of movement, that's what you want to do. You want to do natural breathing. You just want to be very calm and relaxed. You want to figure how to keep the ground path and the gravity working everything you're doing. So you don't need to be thinking about breathing. You just want to breathe naturally. As you become more skilled, you may want to augment the body effects of breathing. And there's a way to do that called reverse breathing. Some people call it Taoist breathing, but essentially it works like this. As you inhale, of course the diaphragm must come down or you can't inhale. But as you inhale, what you can do is pull in the stomach instead of letting it go out. So when you do that, sure you can breathe in, but it also forces stresses and pressures, and things have to find a place to go. So one of the things that you notice when you've done reverse breathing, that is, as you inhale, you pull in the lower, the belly and the abdomen. You begin to notice that you pick up a pressure in this area of the body, the kidney area, and the lower back, and some up into the middle part of the back. And so as you're pushing up, like we did in the universal exercise, if you've pulled your belly in while breathing, the expansion of the back is augmented, and it helps raise the arms upward and outward. So I can use this reverse breathing to actually augment my expanding movements. And of course, when I contract, pretty much the same mechanism takes place as before. But since you're relaxing and pulling down hard, the belly tends to come out a little bit more with this augmenting sort of breathing. And so you'll tend to see in an exhale and reverse breathing, the belly comes out somewhat. And this is a lot of it to do because the body is more heavily contracting downward at that time. Okay, so that's reverse breathing. And the third sort of breathing is really a variation of the reverse breathing. And let's just call it sheath breathing. And the way I'm going to explain sheath breathing is with this Chinese finger puzzle. You know, these are one of those little finger puzzles that you put on, and then when you try to pull apart, it contracts on itself and begins to bite down onto the fingers or hold the fingers tightly so you can't pull them apart. And so what we're going to look at is this finger puzzle. So this is the finger puzzle in a neutral position. When I close it, I can say I push it in like this. See how it contracts the length of it, and the cylinder itself gets a little bit fatter, and it's compacted. And then, so I go back to the neutral position, and then I can say I take this and I pull it apart. It begins to expand and close down on itself. All right, so the three positions are heavily closed, or contracted closed, let's call it. And then there's a neutral, and then there's an expanded closed. So the word closed actually covers two radically different situations: the compacted closed and the expanded closed. I can, when I'm doing the universal exercise, I can go down, and as I wind close, I breathe in. We're using the reverse breathing by pulling in, but I can pretend that my whole body is covered with essentially a Chinese finger puzzle, so that as I close down and in the whole body, I feel it compact and pull in. Then as I rise up, I go through neutral. I should still be breathing in. And then as I close, now I begin to come into the expanded close, okay? So I go from the compacted, drawn-in close to the sort of stretched out, extended close. All right? So I do use the reverse breathing to initiate that form of behavior. So I pull everything in from my fingertips, my toes, everything, and it's focused on pulling in and downward toward the perineum. Okay, so I go. And this is more the way that it's done for more martial training. So the picture in your mind of your body being encapsulated, let's say, or sheathed by a Chinese finger puzzle is very helpful in doing this sort of thing. After you've practiced many times, of course, the body is contracted in, expanded out, and extended. Then essentially your breathing mechanism becomes a goodly portion of your workout. Okay, but this is an augmentation, a supplement to the discussions that we're having about the ground path and the body winding and unwinding. So I just say that as an aside, and I won't dwell on it any more than that. Remember, try to do these things with high numbers of repetitions, but low effort. You don't want any tension. You don't want any blood pressure problems. You just want to do something over a period of time. All right, so let's move on. In using the body as a whole unit with the winding and unwinding, essentially we're moving the ground path. This is the whole point. Whether we do this linearly with closing and opening, or whether we do it with the winding, close, open, close. Doesn't really matter, but the general idea is that we go from close, open, close, if we're going to effect something. So I may store, come through my action, and then close, usually going to another foot, somewhat downward. This is the action of most motions. I can say that in Tai Chi, a single whip motion is a close, open, close. Many hits are close, open, close. It's the length of the body ground force that we're manipulating. Not just something where we have a stable platform and the arms are moving. Okay? So we have to be manipulating the ground path the entire length. I can make a glitch in a punch or a power delivery. For instance, if I were going to hit something with my fist, I could actually hold my fist in place and start powering and then let go and it snaps out. So I could say that one way I could term this is I could simply say that I stored some power in my triceps, which is what is used to extend the arm. So I store my triceps until the force builds up enough and I let go of it and my hand snaps forward. So this is a way I could say that I store and release. Okay? Since I'm dealing with the entire length of the body and not just the arm, when I use internal strength, then there's no point in me storing and releasing in the arm. The arm is not as big, effective, and muscular as the other parts of the body, for instance, the middle or the legs and so forth. So what I intend to do with using the whole length of the body is I want to have a glitch that instead of happening in the triceps, happens in the back. So my normal motion of close, open, close, I'm going to glitch it, disconnect in the back. I start to push into the back normally. I push in, and that motion carries through, and then I go forward. All right? But in this case, I can push into the back and let the pressure build up, and then as I go forward onto the front leg, I can release this way. So if I'm going to store and release, it involves stopping the forward motion, for instance, with the fist. I stop it, let pressure build up, and then releasing it. In the case of using the body, I push from the leg. The leg is very critical in this. Push from the leg into the back and let it store, and then I go forward, releasing. I can do this in a number of directions. I can store into the back, and then instead of releasing forward and up and out, I can do it downward. I can do it sideways, storing into the back, stop it, let it build up while I'm breathing in to the side. So I can do this in a number of directions, but I've got to remember to use the same essentials that I do in all other movements, whether static push or a slow push or whatever. That is that I've got to do this along the path, the ground path that we've established. I cannot go outside of the path. I have to be exactly along the path, or I go back to normal strength. I don't want to store and get ready to push and then suddenly have the shoulders go back and forward, because when I do that, I've broken the path, and that's a common error. I want to power this a lot with the leg and the back unbowing. So when the back unbows, we shift onto the front leg and the weight slams down. As the weight slams onto the front leg, that actually speeds the unbowing of the back, and it also helps the forward momentum. So the weight shift is critical. So how quickly you can shift from the back leg to the front leg is a major, major portion of your ability to release power. The main point that I want to get across in the idea of store and release is that it is no different from the normal movement. For instance, the movement that we're doing in the universal exercise, where we go down, we wind in, we come up, out, and down, whether it's for a hit, whatever. There's no difference between that sort of movement and store and release, except that a glitch has been deliberately interposed into the movement so that it stops us and allows us to build up power and then release it. So that's the main thing I want you to remember, is that there's no real difference between a store and release and normal movement except for a glitch in the timing. Let me give you an example to watch and maybe try to duplicate in terms of how to store and release along the length of the body. Remember that the controlling factor in all of these is that you want to form a ground path from your foot, your supporting leg, to the hand, and you want to store and release always along that path. So I want to push up from my leg into my back, and then when I release, I want to go onto the front leg, and I want the ripple, the power that's released to go out through the hand. Let me turn around and do this with my back to you so that you can watch this happen slowly. So I push from the leg into my back, and then I'm going to go forward and out into the hand. I'll augment this with the breathing that we talked about, where I pull in the stomach, the reverse breathing. Okay, so I pull in while I breathe in, and I load into my back, and then I go forward and into the hand that's out there. I want to go straight along a path from the leg to the hand itself. So I go So if I do something like that, I've got to maintain the ground path exactly from the foot to the hand and not break it. So this ripple of power needs to go strictly along the path. So if I do something like this, the ball is at the end of the path, one end of the path, and my foot and leg is at the other. So I basically store and let the path of power project straight along to the ball. So a good practice exercise would be for you to just go down on one leg, breathe in, pull in the stomach, store in the back, and then go forward rapidly onto the front leg and project straight up to your fingertips. You can pretend there's water on your fingers and that you're trying to shake that water off, not using any local motion, but just the ripple going up your arm. Okay? The most common cheat is that somebody in practicing this will go like this. They'll automatically go to the local use of the arm. Leave the arm fully extended like someone was pulling on your fingertips. Back away from it. And see if you can shake power directly up the fingers. It's a good exercise. Try it. When we combine everything that we've been talking about in terms of the winding and unwinding, or you can do it linearly. I guess you can bend and unbend. There's actually not a lot of difference if you maintain the ground path, but the overall strength is somewhat greater with the winding and the unwinding. But if you combine this sort of closing and then opening with our breathing mechanisms, the reverse breathing, and the store and release, then you begin to develop the skills that allow you to release power on a large scale, or you can do it with very small motion like I did with the white ball that I just shot off the end of my fist using the ripple of power going through. But let me take a moment to look at the directions that we hit, because the directions that we hit have a lot to do with this. Now, again, let me stress that we're only talking about the core strength, not the strategies and techniques that are associated with different arts. For instance, a particular aspect that you always want to look for is to have an opponent in such a position that it takes a minimal force to release power and affect them. Sometimes that doesn't happen. If your power is great, you can release anytime you want. But we're not discussing when you should release properly. We're only discussing how the power is used. Okay, so we have power that essentially there's two main things, although we can combine them to make three. But the first one is up and out from the ground, and the second one is down sort of toward the ground. If we're using the ground path, we must have what feels like a solid connection between the hand and the foot. We can bend our body to store power, and then we can straighten the body to release power. So I'm using this stick with a hinge in the middle to sort of emulate that. And so I've got where the stick touches the ground is essentially a reasonably solid connection to the tip that's touching this bag. If I then consider this hinge as more or less the middle of the body, okay, so along that solid connection, if I suddenly straighten this hinge, the bag must go away. Okay? So essentially what happened was, if you watch the end here where my finger is, as you straighten this hinge, the end goes away. All right, and that's where a lot of the source of power in hitting or pushing comes from, is having a relaxed single ground path from the hand to the foot that you're straightening. You can certainly have a solid frame, posture, and then hit with the arm and shoulder, and that's sort of strong, but it's not the same thing as having one single unit of power and then straightening the hinge in the middle. And there are other hinges too. There are hinges in the elbow, there are hinges in the shoulder, there are hinges in the knee, but I'm just talking in the general case where the middle is being bent. But you've got to bear in mind as your practice and progress increases that there are a number of hinges that are almost open, and then they open. Of course, if you try to open a hinge that's bent too much, it's very difficult, and you resort to muscle. So a too bent posture, or too bent elbow, or too bent shoulder can affect your hit. So it's better to have rounded angles when you do this. The second way that we can hit is downward, and the way that's done, essentially, is that the body, and we'll say this limb is the body, pulls down. As it pulls down, the end goes away. So essentially what happens is, watch where my hand is, as I pull down, it forces my hand away. So if I leave this in one position and I pull it straight down, my hand goes further away. This happens on a bag by me going down, and the force of the body going down push this away. It's important, let me say it again and again, that you keep the ground path intact, unbroken, and in the most relaxed manner to your hands. You can use this winding to set up before you push, and you breathe, and then release. Okay, but you can release in up or down, or this third way, a combination. In the distance between the lower chest and, say, the top of the head, there's room to combine both up or down. Anything above the face or the head, chest, this area, you pretty much are constrained to having to push upward. Anything from this area of the body on down, you pretty much have to push downward. In an area that's in the middle, you can do a combination that pushes up and out, and you can at the same time do a sinking down. So I can actually combine these two, sinking down while straightening out, to get more power. So the three ways of hitting would be up and out, down and away from you, and also some combination in the middle that combines both of those forces. It's both a sinking and an expanding outward. So in the three directions that we're moving or expressing power, these can all be reached through the various internal arts. No matter what we do, remember the universal exercise tends to be where most of these things come from. So if we go down, winding in, we're contracting, closing, we're opening, expanding, and downward. The main thing that we have to pay attention to is that we're using the ground power up, expansion power out and away, weight down, and contracting inward for back toward us. If we do this with one hand, of course, then it's a little bit more obvious in terms of expressing power in a direction, because as we can go up, that's true. But in this case, as we expand outward, we also have a weight shift onto the other leg, down, back in. But this is really still part of the same universal exercise. Okay, so I can do it like this. I can do it like this, which is just a variation. I can do a motion like this. It's the same thing. So I'm going down and contract, up, overturn, and fall. But this is the same motion, but it's done off to the side. I can do a motion a hit, no matter which of the three directions, up, down, or combination, using the reverse of the universal exercise. So all of the punches and hits that we're using become essentially, or academically, some portion of the universal exercise that we've been doing. Even when you see a small, short one, there's still this sort of winding and then release. Okay, so there's a wind. Same thing, other side. Winding, closed, open. So I'm here. So this ability looks like it's fairly simple motion, but if you think about it, it's still always this same whole body winding, contracting, expanding, and then closing again. So we got close, open, close, all of them from the universal exercise that we've been practicing. If you're touching something, it's a slightly different case, not much, but it's slightly different. I essentially can still keep the ground paths to this bag while I back away from it and store my back, and then straighten upward into this, and the back goes away. It's a fairly obvious mechanics when you do it like that. I can augment this by adding to the way that I go down. If I had a nice boost to the bottom of my foot when I started my push forward, it would add to the power that's going into the bag. I can start as a beginner and raise the heel of my right foot, and I can drop into it and then use that shock, let it travel through my ground path and express itself in the hand. All right, so I could practice by speeding up my going down and then releasing. Ultimately, I begin to drop into the heel, and I let the shock wave go through me. But that's for a beginner. As you get somewhat better at this, you should be able to just turn the waist down and drive your power into the leg and let it come back through. So the power is based on the ground path going through you and the ability of your waist to send power back down your foot so that it can bounce forward and through and out to the bag. Or I can do the same thing in a way of, if I'm already touching, of suddenly dropping the body down and forward onto the front leg and letting this power carry through to the hands and drive things away. So, but these can be developed to a pretty high level of power if you work at them. This is just basically how to do it. My point and comment would be, never break your path. In other words, if I'm going to do the one where I drop into my heel, it doesn't do me any good if I suddenly drop my shoulders back, and I go, essentially then I just push from my shoulders. You must keep one continuous path from the ground to your hands at all time and never break it, or you begin to lose the whole meaning of this sort of exercise. As I said, I don't want to focus too much on the techniques and strategies of something, for instance, in the martial arts or qigongs or various exercises. I want to look more at the core strength, but a good example of using the core strength doesn't hurt. Let's take some examples from Aikido and just take a look at them and how the core strengths are applied. Now there are two strengths to watch in this. One, of course, is the ground path coming up, and the other is the gravity and the connection of the body going down. Actually, the body has to be connected in two ways. One way is this. Mark, if Mark is pushing on my arm like this, so he's push into me. So he's pushing into me, and I'm very relaxed, and I form a compressed connection, you could say. It's really more of a structure to the ground. The other way is if he immediately changes from a push into me and begins to pull on my elbow. So as he pulls me, he's actually compressing my front foot right now. I'm still relaxed. And so when he pulls me, for me to get his pull from where it is out here to the middle part of my body involves a connection of the arm to the central part of the body. So that's the second sort of power that we have to look at. All right, so again, we're not going to look at a technique and say this is the way it's done. We're more concerned with how to use the core strength and the technique, because of course various schools and styles will do different techniques differently. All right, the first thing from Aikido I wanted to look at is the rolling exercise, the Fune Kogi Undo, that you see a lot of times in practice before class, where basically people move backwards and forwards. Some people tend to use more of the arms, but the core strength idea to that is exactly what Mark was just showing with me. This particular movement is where you're using the pulling, as we did in the first video, where you can almost pretend that somebody has their hand tucked into your belt, and you're pulling them with your belt. And the second portion of the exercise is the push. Then again, it's like you're pushing from your back leg through your back, and then in a straight line from the spine to the hands. So you more or less push with the spine. So you push with the spine, pull with the belt. Push with the spine, pull with the belt. And this is normally done before class to sort of warm you up, to get you used to moving in this particular way. Another common scenario in Aikido, Mark, if I can borrow you please, would be Nikkyo itself. Nikkyo is a wrist joint lock. It's called Xiaotren in Chinese, and it basically involves capturing the opponent's hand and then applying a torque onto the wrist. This can just be done, of course, anybody can grab somebody's hand and then turn and apply a force. What you normally want to do to practice doing this in Aikido, Taiji, Xingyi, or any of the martial arts that use this particular joint lock is maybe slowly practice going through the steps of it. And that would be, first of all, the ground path up. So I push my whole body up using the unbowing back that we talked about earlier. So I push up. Now then, I push somewhat toward Mark with my back leg and my weight moving forward. And then I use the gravity and connection of my body to come down. Okay, so in other words, I'm not just using the wrist to do this, I'm using the body to turn and come down. As I get more and more experienced and accomplished at this, of course the movements will begin to look very much like just hand and wrist. But if you watch the body, the movement is quite small as you go further, okay? So over and over. So with Mark, later you can do this movement, okay, and you can see the middle moves when you actually apply this. After you've done this sort of thing for a long period of time, this is again related to the core exercise where we were talking about using the universal exercise and everything comes from it. This is, again, comes directly from that particular exercise. When you've done this sort of motion for a long period of time, the arm becomes trained not to work so much from the shoulder, but from the back. So when I do this, the back has a very much, quite a large role in doing this. And after you've done this for quite some period of time, then the arm more or less becomes connected to the back. If Mark, if I could use for an example, if Mark takes my arm and twists it, turn it hard, I can stay relaxed and let the torsion from this work onto my back. I feel, as he does this, I feel more pressure, thanks, in my foot as he does this because it works through my body. If I try to stop it locally, then the local muscles and the joints have to contain the torque that he's putting on there, and that's where pain begins to come in. But this idea of moving the connection of this from the center part of the body out to the arm is a good portion of the connection and gravity part of the way we're talking about in the whole body movement and the universal exercise. So in Aikido, you also have wrist exercises that involve bringing this key strength out. For instance, the exercise where you basically replicate the actions done in the Nikkyo exercise, these are partially to train the wrist and forearm structure to take the pressure, but they're also for you to relax and allow the connection from the central part of the body and the back to come out there. So when you do this, you're not necessarily just focusing on the wrist, you're also focusing on, does this torque go all the way to the back? So you're training the power of the middle section of the body to get out to the wrist, the hand itself. There's a second one in this particular set where the wrist is turned outward, kotegai. But again, this test and conditions the forearm and the wrist to some extent, but you need to go beyond that particular focus and feel this twist go all the way into the torso and into the lower back. So when you do this, you should feel that you are training the winding to go into the lower back. In this case, I'm using my left hand, so most of the strain would go into the left side of my lower back. Okay, and then there's a third one that involves this form of stretching. This is conditioning, but at the same time, you should feel the ground path going to here. So I may be conditioning the tendons in the forearm itself, but I also should be feeling like there's a stop. Mark, if I could borrow you for a minute. So if Mark is pushing, okay, now lean into me. So if he's leaning into me, I am bringing a ground path to this point where he's coming into me. And then, of course, the last of these exercises has to do with a wrist lock that's in this shape. And, of course, it does condition the wrist to do this, but you also, at the same time, so when he's pushing here, again, you should practice moving a ground path to meet his incoming force. Okay? A lot of the pulls in Aikido or the body movements where you move backward or you're pulling something. There's no difference between this sort of movement and anything that we've talked about before. Strictly, you can get it most quickly by just picturing yourself pulling with your obi or with your belt as you're pulling something. And one last little thing I wanted to show also was in the case of Nikyo, if I could stop this particular movement here where he's pushing in, push, push. So as he comes in, I stop this with the ground path. If I can stop this with the ground path, then as he grabs my hand and he comes around and he applies Nikyo to me, apply. So as I feel his force coming into me, I simply adjust mine to meet an opposing force. He's applying pressure. I can feel his body coming in this direction onto my wrist. So as he does this, I establish a ground path from my leg to here. So as he's beginning to press down into the Nikyo formation, it doesn't particularly matter how hard he does it, I feel a compression in this leg, and I'm stopping him with a directed ground path that's going and holding this, so I can use the ground to, in this way. We might not actually try to stop something like that, but it's a good demonstration. All right, so that's a few examples that we could take a look at in terms of Aikido, or they work in other martial arts also. Let's go through a few exercises and remember as we go along that almost any exercise you can do which involves using the body as a unit, if it's done correctly, is going to be some variation of the universal exercise. Even a Taiji form, movements in Aikido, hitting drills in Xingyi, Bagua movements, all of these things are basically the universal exercise done through an infinite number of variations. Let's take a look. The universal exercise is probably the main recommendation I would make for an exercise. The point is nice in the sense that the body winds and unwinds and feels good and so forth. But if you don't keep the ground path, the up and out, the weight down and back in, through all of the variations, then you're missing the whole point. Just making the body close, wind, open, unwind is not the point of all this. The point is to learn how to manipulate this ground path or the gravity path through all aspects of your movement, so it becomes a trained inherent part of your movement. So even if I do okay, so I might go a simple set of rotations like this. It's a nice warm-up. Notice that the legs are involved. And the focus of the mind is on keeping the power in the hands, the correct power. The ground power up, out, the weight pulling down. The weight pulls down through this portion of the body and down through the perineum and pulls the hands down, up. A little bit more explanation of this was done on the first video, so if you haven't seen that, you might want to take a look. Variations of the universal exercise might be ones where you have a foot forward, okay, and again you're winding in, up, out but more to the front, down, winding as you come back in. It's just a variation. Pay attention to where the paths of power are, the four directions of power. So as you wind in, the knees come in, the elbows come in, the back bows. You push from the ground up, out, unbowing, elbows come out, sink down, come back in, up, unwinding, down, winding. Breathe in while you pull the stomach in. Breathe out as you express power. Okay? You can try all of the variations that you want. Exaggerations are recommended at first. Just go through them. Try them stepping. Again, as you wind in, the foot comes in. As you express outward, the foot goes out. So instead of doing this with both hands, let me just do it with one. Wind in. Okay. So the body is moving the same through all of these. You can make your own up. You can do the reverse of the universal exercise. Explore, experiment around with this, and just keep playing with it. This is how you get somewhere, by using the relationship between the universal exercise and the normal movements that you do. All right, one thing to always bear in mind, that these motions with the universal exercise, they're the same. There's no real difference between when you do them winding, up, out. When you do them in this slow exercise manner with the correct power, it's when you do them with a little bit more release. Okay, so I wind, or just, these are all the same thing. All right, so let me go to a simple but extremely effective exercise. It doesn't look like there's much to it, but generally if somebody is practicing to increase their power in a martial arts scenario, push hands, Aikido, one exercise that I recommend a lot is that you push a heavy bag or something similar to it. You can make one with sand and, say, a flour sack. Tape it with duct tape till it's sort of round, the size of a basketball. Hang that in a net mesh type laundry bag. Hang it from the ceiling. Preferably use bungee cords so the shock doesn't go through the ceiling and shake your neighbors up. But any sort of bag, push it slightly away from you so that the force is coming back to you. See then if you can find the most relaxed position to allow that push to go to your foot. Once you have that, and there's no strain on your shoulders, there's no strain on your back, and your back leg is supporting most of this. Don't lean into it, by the way. Stay sort of upright. Then sink down that leg, let your back bow, then expand. Sink down the leg, letting the back bow expand directly along the path. Sink down along the path with a curve. Come out of the sink very straight. So you curve or you go down and come straight out when you come out. So just back and forth a number of times, and you'll begin to strengthen the leg and back so that they accept most of the responsibility for your actions. In other words, most of your power will be coming from the legs and back, and the upper body will just be a transmitter of that sort of power. Another simple but extremely effective exercise can be rigged in your house by getting a piece of bungee. This is about, I don't know, the thickness, the diameter of my little finger. I don't know what gauge that is or anything, but you can find something like it at a yachting store or some climbing stores or any well-equipped hardware store. And essentially what you want to do is now practice a lot more of your down power, which is often not worked very much. There are static drills for practicing down power that simply involve you putting your weight into your hand and sinking and trying not to use the local arm muscles to hold it down, but try to put your weight on the hand. So this is the equivalent of doing, say, standing exercises where you're practicing up and out using the ground power. This is the down power. Or we can take this and push it away from its center line, and now that I've got it away, it's pressing sort of up in this direction. Okay, but now then I can use this to go in a circle. So I go down in the front, come toward me, let it rise up, which it will with its own elasticity. I push it forward, down, sort of toward me. And the only side of this that I don't get a lot of work in is the one where it goes up. But I try to let my body weight constrain the amount that it goes up. So I do a circle, and essentially what I'm doing is exercising my middle. So this is the way that I can just relax and exercise my middle, particularly in a downward fashion. Okay? You can use both hands when you do this. You can do it, you can reverse the directions. It's a good tool. I recommend somebody set it up a lot of times at a basement if you have a basement, between some rafters. It's a good place to set it up. You can do it with a single strand, or you can do a wrapped double strand so that you can do it with one for a while, and then if you feel like you're up to it, do two at a time. So these are just suggestions in terms of using a bungee, which, as I said, I really recommend as an exercise. One way to increase your body power is to work with tools or weapons, and because you're controlling them and they're somewhat heavy, you can build up the strength of your whole body somewhat more rapidly than with just the weight of your hands and arms or legs and so forth. I like to use a pole a lot, and the idea is basically that I am establishing a ground path from my feet out through the pole to the end of the pole. So I want to feel that. If something were pushing against the end of my pole, I would be grounding it into my leg. So that's why I established a ground path to the end of this. Of the two exercises, there are two directions. One is down and forward, and the other one is up and back. Okay, so from these two exercises, a number of other exercises can be developed. Almost all fudging or spear or pole drills come from the down and up exercises that I'll show you. Essentially, if I've got a ground path from my feet to the end of the pole, I want to control that path with my legs and my middle. So I can do this in a very exaggerated fashion where I'm staying on my back leg. I sink down, winding in, just like we talked about in the universal exercise. So I'm winding in. I begin to push up my back. Notice that I'm letting it move the spear. And then as I sink outward and down, my arms and all unwind so that my palm comes down. So really I'm sort of winding, closed. I'm going up, out, onto the front leg, and down, unwinding. Okay? So really, if you watch my middle, it's doing most of the work. Let me do this a couple of times. See, I'm winding, unwinding, down. Okay? So here I go, slowly, winding, push up the back. Now I'm breathing in to add the reverse breathing. Unwind, onto the front leg. Okay? I am not doing anything like this with my arm. This is the immediate cheat that seems to slip in almost invariably. So I always suggest that somebody leave the front arm extended and away from the body and allow the waist to do the work. So see, the arm and the shoulder are not really doing this. It's the waist as I wind inward, push out the back, and down onto the front leg. So you might want to do this with large motions to start with, and then gradually work to the point where where the actual motion to do this is very small, but your power release gets larger with practice. Okay? So that's down. I did it frontward. Let me just do it backwards so you can see it for a minute. I'm on my back leg. So I'm winding in, pushing up through the back, and go forward onto the front leg. So down, breathe in while I come into my back. Okay, so this is an exercise to train the middle. That's mainly what it is. It's not an exercise that's devoted to impressing your friends how much you can shake a pole. That's where people get sidetracked. This is strictly an exercise to boost the power of the middle. The second direction is up, and it's very much like we've taken a pitchfork full of hay, and we throw it up into the hayloft, which is behind it in that direction. So I scoop it up. My weight's on the front leg in this case. I push into my back, and then as I change onto the back leg, I turn backward. Okay? So I'm on the front leg, and I'm storing and shifting onto the back leg. That's the major point. Let me do it with my back to you so you can see this better. So here I am. The pole is in position. I'm on the front leg. I breathe in and store in the back. And then I go hard onto the back leg, and I throw the hay backward behind the forward shoulder. Okay? So a couple more times. Onto the front leg. Breathe in while you store into the back. Sudden shift hard onto the back leg while you turn in this direction. After a while, you shouldn't need so much overt movement. I can take the spear also. It's really good for an exercise where I just practice storing and releasing like we did in the earlier section on store and release. I hold it vertically in front of me, one hand or two, it doesn't matter. I'll use one. And I do exactly the same mechanics that we did before. It's just that now I've got a nice springy weight in my hands, and this springy weight will help because it absorbs a lot of the shock that might go to my shoulder or elbow. So I hold this back, hold this out. I go back onto my back leg. I store in the back while I breathe in and pull in my stomach. And then I go forward on the front leg and release power and let the spear absorb it. So it's essentially the same thing we did a while ago with the example of flicking the water off the fingers, only we've got a little bit of weight in our hand. So I go back onto the back leg, store. The speed and the amount of power that you can put into going downward have a lot of effect on this. So a lot of times going downward is similar to, let's say if you were sitting on a rail or something going between your legs and you tried to break it. If you use that sort of motion when you go forward and slam down very hard, you'll begin helping the release power of your back. So you go back on the back leg, store, breathe in, go forward and slam down, and you'll notice that your power picks up quite a bit. Okay, I really recommend if you can get a springy pole, not a rigid one, you can go quite a distance with this sort of practice. Let me close again with my usual admonishment that you must be as relaxed as you can be to do this. If you're not relaxed, the ground path becomes segmented by tight joints. And if you're not relaxed, the new use of muscles and shifting of the fulcrums, in other words, letting the power come from the feet as opposed to, say, from the waist or from the shoulders, that new setup of coordinated muscles you need never happens. If you continue to use shoulder muscles throughout some portion of these movements, then you never fully progress. So stay relaxed, manipulate the ground path, pay very close attention, monitor yourself so your back is relaxed and you're not using the shoulders to do things, but you're using the waist to turn them around. That's all I'm going to say on it. Have fun, practice hard.